Hey, how y'all doing? I hope well. It's your old pal Melissa Joy. This is my grandmother's coat, and while this picture is from 2011, I've had it since the 90s. I hadn't dry cleaned it, but I know that old dry cleaning solution will turn clothes kinda gray. So I opted to wash it out. Wool is fine to wash on a gentle cold water wash in your washing machine, but the antique fur disintegrated. Whoops. So I definitely needed to replace the collar. I proceeded to put it in my storage room and occasionally look for a faux fur coat from the thrift store. But my efforts weren't rewarded. I recently went to the Fabric Warehouse in Rahway, New Jersey. I'll put a link down below. I was looking for some fun and inexpensive jersey because I'm into making leggings right now. I decided to take a peek at the fake fur just to see what they had, and lo and behold, they had the perfect match. So I opted to buy a yard. It was $20 a yard, which is about average for fake fur. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to replace this collar. And what's very exciting is that you don't even need a sewing machine because everything is going to be done by hand. So let's do it. First things first, you are going to take the collar flap off of the coat. You'll use your seam ripper and some scissors and do it very carefully. Thread mark where your collar will be put back. It's a guideline. Use a basting stitch in a contrasting color. You will be removing this stitch later. This is what it should look like once the collar is off and you've thread marked. Remove the padding from the underlining. Try to keep it as intact as possible. I know it's hard because it's disintegrated. Once you have removed the pad from the underlining, set it aside. Next, you're going to remove these big hooks. They're called fur hooks, which I guess is a statement of the obvious. Either way, set the fur hooks aside as well because you're going to use them later. Lay the old collar or padding onto the backside of the fake fur. Now you're going to trace it. You will probably have to correct the pattern since this is a disintegrating piece. Make sure that your fur is laying downward. I did have to do this twice. Luckily, I had bought a yard of this fake fur. Cut out the collar, making sure to add in seam allowance. Cutting it with a razor blade will leave you less mess, but that's actually for more advanced people, and I'm assuming that if you're watching this and learning, you're not there yet. And that's okay. I'm really happy that you're trying this out. It's always good to learn new stuff. So use a scissor. Just be aware that it's going to leave a huge mess. Make sure that your vacuum is nearby, or if you have an outdoor space, do it outside. Now, take the underside to the ironing board and press flat. The seam allowances here that are folded can stay. You just want the lining to lay really nice. Honestly, so much of sewing is having good pressing skills. You wouldn't want to do this on a satin fabric like this, but when I am making clothing out of cotton woven, like pajama pants, I will use a little starch to get my seams super flat. Having super flat seams takes your project to the next level. Pick out a thread that matches your fur. Fold the seam allowance over to your line that you drew earlier, which is the finished size. You're going to clip the corners to cut down on the bulk and make it easier to fold it nicely. Jimmy wasn't terribly interested in this project. Mostly he just napped, but he did have to get in some baby time. Sew down the fur using large stitches. This is also known as a whip stitch. Tack the clipped corners so that they meet and lay nicely. As you can see, it is the sides and the top that we're stitching down. Leave the bottom undone for now. Now it's time to pin down the undercollar along the 3 sides of fur that we've just tacked down. You're going to start by pinning the 2 sides, and then you're going to pin the middle point. Then you'll pin the long portion of the collar. One thing to know about antique fabric is that it will warp a little. So, you might need to do a few pleats, which will help with the curve. It's totally fine. You will just stitch down those pleats a little bit later. I know it seems counterintuitive, but unpin your sides. We are going to put down some twill tape or grosgrain ribbon as an anchor for the fur hooks. Figure out your placement, making sure the fur hook hangs over and that the twill is covered by the undercollar. You can opt to do your twill as a strip or in 2 pieces. I opted to do 2 pieces. Either way, fold the raw edges in. Then do some secure stitching for the anchor points. Double check your placement. Sew the fur hook, then the eye. They should hang slightly over. They'll be disguised by the fur of the collar, so it'll be fine. I usually quadruple my thread for extra strength, but if you have button thread, use that. Highmark was a huge brand, but it appears to be discontinued, or at least not very easy to locate. Gutermann does have a button thread, but honestly, quadrupling is totally okay. Don't spend extra money if you don't need to. Tack down your pleats in the undercollar. Then stitch the undercollar to the fur, taking care not to get tangled in the hooks or getting the fur caught in your stitching. If you do, you have to just comb it out a little. Take your time. You've got plenty of it. One thing that I love about hand sewing is the amount of control that you have. I also find it very meditative, so sit back, enjoy a little hand sewing. Maybe you'll listen to a podcast or your favorite record. My favorite podcast is Beautiful Anonymous, where it's a person calls in and talks about their life for an hour. My favorite band is Motorhead, but it doesn't lend itself to relaxing hand sewing. We're getting close to done. It's time to close the bottom by sewing down where the fur meets the collar. Pin, checking to make sure you didn't take up too much and that it's laying really nicely. This is probably the most fiddly, yet important step to your collar looking right. If you need to, take a break. You don't want to rush.
Ouch.
This is where I stuck myself. Try not to do that. Once it's laying correctly, hand sew. Make sure to catch the underpart of the fur and not just the hair. You will most certainly have to comb through so the stitches meld in. Match up and pin the corners of the collar with the ends of the thread mark on the coat. You can use a few pins if you want along the collar, but you really don't need to. Sew the collar to the original spot, allowing for adjustments. What will make life easier is to sew from the corner to the middle and then repeat it on the other side. Once your collar is on, pull out your thread marks. Guess what? You have completed this project, and you now have a nice fancy collar on your coat. Since this collar is now faux fur, it is washable. Do so in a cold water gentle cycle and hang to dry. This will help tame down any excess puffiness and wash away any old dry cleaning fluid. You'll be very happy because old dry cleaning fluid, that crap is nasty. Here is the completed project. The collar is so soft. I'm thinking about trimming the cuffs. If I do, I will make a part 2 and show you how to use a razor. Anyhow, thank you for watching, and I'll see you real soon.